We thank the listeners who have already subscribed to our channel and invite new ones to subscribe for free as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us.
Today's deep dive pulls entirely from the really groundbreaking 2018 research by historian and professor Reuven Feingold.
Right. His Mirage article, Judaische Guerra de Malvinas-1982. It is a vital piece of work.
It really is. And to start, I want you to put yourself in this scenario for just a moment. Imagine being 19 years old.
Barely an adult.
Exactly. You are drafted into the military and flown into a freezing, terrifying combat zone. You have to fight a highly trained foreign power.
The threat of enemy artillery is constant.
But then, as the days blur into weeks, you discover something even more horrifying.
Which is hard to imagine in a war zone.
Right. Your most vicious abusers, the people inflicting the absolute greatest physical and psychological torment upon you, are not the enemy soldiers across the battlefield.
No, they are your own commanding officers.
It is the dual nightmare of war.
It truly is. And our mission in this deep dive is to explore that hidden history. We're looking at Jewish Argentine soldiers during the 1982 Falklands War, or the Guerra de Malvinas, looking back more than 40 years later.
To see exactly how deep-seated institutional anti-Semitism manifested right there on the freezing front lines.
Essentially creating a separate, silent war within a larger international conflict.
But to really grasp why these young men were targeted, we cannot just look at 1982 in a vacuum, right?
No, definitely not.
We have to understand the massive churning geopolitical machine that chewed them up. And the history of these islands is incredibly convoluted.
Well, you have the Dutch discovering them in the 18th century.
Right.
Then control passing between Spain and Argentina. But the real friction point starts in 1833.
When the British Empire invaded.
Exactly. Their primary objective was securing strategic support points to control navigation routes in the South Atlantic.
But the crucial piece of context here is that Argentina never once abandoned its claims of sovereignty over the territory.
Never. Historically, they even had the backing of Brazilian diplomacy on this specific issue.
So this territorial dispute just simmered in the background for over a century.
Yeah, and you start seeing Argentine nationalism regarding the islands surge significantly in the 1930s and 1940s.
Which was a period when their broader alliance with the British began to face severe domestic questioning.
Right. Yet, despite all this grand political posturing from capitals thousands of miles away, the primary economic activity actually happening on the islands for decades was simply sheep farming.
Sheep farming, which makes the explosion of violence in 1982 seem almost out of nowhere if you are only looking at the islands themselves.
It does seem sudden, but the trigger for the actual war wasn't about sheep farming.
No.
And it wasn't even entirely about territorial pride. It was about an Argentine military dictatorship that was desperately clinging to power.
Right. They were facing massive domestic unrest, economic struggles.
So they calculated that appealing to raw patriotism would fix things.
By sending thousands of young conscripts to reclaim the territory from the British military apparatus.
Thinking it would magically unify the country behind the junta.
That is the tragedy at the core of this conflict. They use young lives as a political distraction.
And the legacy of that decision is profound trauma. Following the conflict, there was a complete diplomatic freeze between the two nations throughout the 1980s.
It wasn't until the presidency of Carlos Menem that relations tentatively resumed, right?
Yes, under what was termed a sovereignty umbrella.
Which essentially meant both nations agreed to set aside the explosive question of who ultimately owned the islands.
Merely to grant permission for war veterans and their families to visit the military cemeteries to mourn their dead.
If you want a visceral sense of that lingering trauma, look at the 2005 film Iluminados por el Fuego.
Very powerful film.
It is. It centers on characters named Esteban Leguizamón and Alberto. In the film, Alberto attempts suicide decades after the war ends.
And through flashbacks, we see the absolute horrors they endured in 1982.
The film makes a very clear argument. Alberto's post-war depression and ultimate tragedy are fundamentally just another crime committed by the Argentine military dictatorship.
Because the war didn't end when the guns stopped firing.
Right. And geopolitically, those tensions certainly did not end in the 80s either.
No. The rise of the Kirchners in the 2000s brought a strong return of nationalism to Argentine politics.
Then you factor in the discovery of lucrative oil and gas reserves around the islands.
As the global price of hydrocarbons rose, so did the friction. The strategic importance of the islands for Antarctic exploration also increased dramatically.
And the United Kingdom responded to this renewed pressure with significant media and military posturing.
They deployed Prince William, who was second in line to the throne at the time, for a weeks-long tour,
They dispatched a powerful warship.
and even sent a nuclear missile-armed submarine to the region.
Meanwhile, the diplomatic rhetoric escalated at the United Nations. And looking at this with strict political neutrality, the exchanges were incredibly intense.
Very intense. Argentina formally denounced the British presence as an ongoing colonial situation, heavily criticizing the militarization of South Atlantic natural resources.
In response, the United Kingdom firmly defended the self-determination rights of the islanders.
The Kelpers, as they are commonly referred to.
Right. UK Prime Minister David Cameron then fired back at the UN, explicitly stating that the Argentines were the real colonialists in this scenario.
It became a high-stakes standoff over oil, shipping routes, and national pride.
But notice who is completely missing from that grand political narrative: the actual human beings on the ground.
The young conscripts.
They were treated as entirely disposable. It is like a high-stakes chess match where the human pawns are completely ignored by both sides.
That is a perfect analogy.
And that brings us out of the macro-political maneuverings and directly into the freezing trenches.
If we want to understand the reality of this war, we have to look at the harrowing experience of a 19-year-old soldier named Silvio Katz.
Yes, Silvio Katz was part of the Mechanized Infantry Regiment 3.
Often abbreviated as RIMEC 3, based in Tablada.
Right. On April 11th, 1982, Katz arrived in the Malvinas. But the conditions of his arrival are just staggering. I want to make sure you hear this clearly.
It is hard to believe.
He was flown from the Palomar Air Base in a plane that literally had no seats.
No seats.
He was wearing summer clothes in an environment where temperatures routinely drop well below freezing.
And to top it off, he was handed a rifle that didn't even work.
That is not just negligent, that is practically a death sentence before he even sees a British soldier.
But incredibly, the freezing weather and the broken equipment were not his primary tormentors.
His biggest threat was his own superior.
Sublieutenant Eduardo Flores Arduino.
The abuse Katz endured was entirely systematic.
And it was specifically targeted at his Jewish identity. Sublieutenant Arduino forced Katz to freeze his hands in ice water.
Oh, wow.
He would deliberately throw Katz's meager food rations into the trash.
And then force the starving teenager to retrieve and eat it using only his mouth.
Arduino constantly berated him, calling Jewish people cowards and using every offensive slur available.
Katz later reflected on this and noted something truly chilling.
What was that?
He said Arduino genuinely enjoyed it. He found happiness in seeing Katz suffer.
You would probably think that when the actual British bombardments began on May 1st, 1982, the Argentine troops would be forced to band together.
Right, survival usually mandates unit cohesion.
But the bombs did not unify them at all. Instead, the deafening noise of the artillery simply provided cover for Arduino to escalate his abuse without drawing attention.
Under the cover of bombardment, Katz was deprived of sleep for entire nights.
And Arduino deliberately withheld food from him for days at a time. The psychological cruelty perfectly matched the physical deprivation.
There is an incident Katz recounts that truly highlights the absurdity of the hate.
Where preparing his group for combat, Sublieutenant Arduino lined up the soldiers.
Okay.
He produced a bottle of whiskey and gave a drink to every single soldier down the line to warm them up and steady their nerves.
But when he reached Katz,
He deliberately stopped. He skipped him entirely, looked him in the eye, and told him directly, "You won't drink, you'll be killed."
wait, think about the logistics of that for a second. Amidst a live bombardment where survival relies entirely on every single man doing his job perfectly.
Yes.
This commander is actually taking time and energy out of a combat scenario to orchestrate a petty, targeted psychological attack on his own soldier.
It defies all logic of warfare.
How does a military apparatus function like that?
Well, it defies survival logic, but it perfectly follows the logic of institutionalized bigotry.
Because what this reveals is that the hatred was not some tragic byproduct of the stress of combat.
Exactly. The war merely provided an unsupervised, chaotic laboratory for pre-existing, deeply rooted prejudice.
And Katz was far from an isolated case. Much of what we know today comes from the tireless work of journalist Hernan Dobry.
Yes, for the 30th anniversary of the conflict, Dobry published a vital book called Los Rabinos de Malvinas,
He managed to locate 25 Jewish fighters.
10 of whom provided deeply detailed, revelatory testimonies.
If your own commander is actively torturing you, wouldn't you just surrender to the British at the first opportunity or simply refuse to fight?
It is a perfectly logical question to ask.
But the testimonies Dobry collected showcase an incredible, almost heartbreaking resilience and patriotism from these Jewish soldiers.
Take Pablo Makarowski from Artillery Group 4.
He fought fiercely until he was severely wounded during a British bombardment.
As he was bleeding, an Argentine sub-officer approached him and actually expressed shock that a Jewish soldier was fighting for the country.
Makarowski swallowed hard and gave a powerful, defining reply. He said, "I am Argentine, nothing to do with being Jewish or not."
That sentiment is so important because it directly refutes the ethno-nationalist ideology of the dictatorship.
For the officers, being Argentine was tied to a very specific identity.
And being Jewish somehow disqualified you from full citizenship or patriotism in their eyes.
Claudio Alejandro Spin, also from RIMAC 3, faced similar exclusion.
Yes, relentless harassment from his superiors while on guard duty with his friend Van Roy.
But perhaps the most mind-boggling manifestation of this bigotry is what we could call draft dodging in reverse.
Draft dodging in reverse.
Imagine trying to break into a burning building to save your fellow citizens. But the fire chief actively bars the door, not because it's too dangerous, but purely because he doesn't like your religion.
You had young Jewish men desperately trying to deploy to the front to defend their country.
And their commanders were actively blocking them.
Marcelo Eddy, from the Patricia's Infantry Regiment 1, often known as RIP-1, is a perfect example of this.
On June 3, he was stationed in the city of Comodoro Rivadavia.
His mortar section received the order to depart for the islands. Just as they were packing to leave, the unit commander pulled Eddy out of the group.
And he explicitly stated that Eddy would not be allowed to deploy solely because he was Jewish.
But Eddy did everything in his power to get there anyway.
He actually found another soldier who was trembling with fear at the prospect of deploying, and Eddy quietly traded places with him.
By June 6, Eddy had smuggled himself onto the front lines at Dos Hermanas, or Two Sisters.
And right there in the trenches, he encountered a first lieutenant who went out of his way to style his hair with gel and trim his mustache to look exactly like Adolf Hitler.
This lieutenant declared in front of the exhausted men that he would proudly take Creole soldiers, but never a Jew.
But Eddy bravely mocked him right back.
He sarcastically replied that everyone in the trench was clearly as brave as the lieutenant.
The officer threatened him, demanding he not talk back to his superior.
But Eddy, having absolutely nothing left to lose on the freezing front line, challenged him.
He asked, "What will happen to me? Will you hit me or put me in jail?"
It resulted in a profoundly tense, profanity-laced standoff.
It perfectly highlights the absolute absurdity of the officer's priorities, focusing on racial purity tests while the British Army is literally marching toward them.
And then there was the story of Sigurd Kogan, also from RIP-1.
Back in Palermo, while the units were initially forming, officers demanded that all Jewish soldiers step forward out of the ranks.
They then forced Kogan to adopt the fake surname Fernandez, just to replace a missing soldier on the official roster.
Erasing his identity before he even deployed.
And when Kogan finally made it to the Malvinas, the hostility was so suffocating that even when he fell severely ill, he refused to go to the infirmary.
He chose to suffer in silence in a freezing trench just to escape the verbal and physical abuse of his commanders.
Because the hatred they faced was entirely irrational. It wasn't based on their performance as soldiers.
No, not at all. Take Adrian Hasse, a soldier in the Mechanized Infantry Regiment 6 at Goat Ridge.
He was called over by his superior, Sub-Lieutenant Frinko, right in the middle of the British bombardments.
Frinko looked at him and openly declared, "I hate Jews."
When Hasse, understandably stunned, asked why, Frinko simply replied, "I don't know, but I hate them."
It is pure, unfiltered bigotry, completely divorced from reality.
Even something as simple and human as receiving a care package from home became a dangerous trigger.
Right. Sergio Van Raw received a package, and his sergeant flew into a jealous, unhinged rage.
He cursed Van Raj as a damn Jew, furious that a Jewish soldier was receiving mail while he was not.
The sergeant was so vindictive that he actively tried to have Van Raw permanently reassigned to the absolute front line of combat as a punishment.
Thankfully, another superior officer stepped in and intervened before that could happen.
If we pull back and connect this to the broader historical context, you realize that these frontline horrors did not just spontaneously emerge from the stress of 1982.
No, they were the extreme manifestation of a deeply entrenched systemic issue within the Argentine military.
Particularly targeting conscripts born in 1962 and 1963.
To understand why an officer in the 1980s is styling his hair like Hitler, you have to look back at the military academies.
Right, because we mentioned that surge in Argentine nationalism back in the 1930s and 40s.
And following World War II, Argentina infamously became a primary haven for escaping Nazi officials.
That ideology didn't just vanish. It seeped into the institutional culture, especially within the military training structures.
Precisely. There was a deeply entrenched culture of hostility against Jewish recruits long before the Falklands War began.
Inside the military, they called these targeted abuses the bales, which translates to the dances.
But they were absolutely not dances. They were systematic, weekly torture sessions.
Jorge Carlos Steinberg from the Mechanized Engineers Company 10 noted that certain sub-officers were specifically appointed with the express purpose of kicking, isolating, and abusing Jewish soldiers.
They were consistently given the most hazardous, humiliating, and unsanitary tasks available.
The specific details of these bales are difficult to hear, but we have to acknowledge them to understand what these teenagers survived.
Gustavo Ginsburg, a soldier from Mechanized Infantry Brigade 11 in Rio Gallegos, detailed a horrific incident.
At 2 in the morning, 5 Jewish soldiers were dragged from their beds.
They were forced outside in only their underwear into the freezing Patagonian weather.
The officers made them clap with sharp cacti in their bare hands.
Then they were forced to crawl over frozen mud and sharp granite until their elbows and feet were bleeding.
Silvio Katz corroborated this exact type of abuse, noting that these torture sessions happened to the Jewish soldiers once or twice every single week during their mandatory military service.
The psychological warfare drew heavily on two distinct yet overlapping hatreds: ancient religious anti-Semitism and overt Nazi sympathies.
On the religious side, you had Officer Kaufman, who literally blamed Claudio Sipin for the death of Jesus.
He constantly called Spin a traitor, insisted it was his divine duty to convert him.
And actually forced Spin to act as an altar boy during Catholic Mass.
Spin, displaying incredible, quiet defiance, noted that he respectfully helped the priest, but he absolutely remained Jewish in his heart and mind.
And then the Nazi tropes were just blatantly out in the open.
Marcelo Laufer of Regiment 1 was explicitly told by a superior to his face, "I really don't understand how you are still here. The Nazis should have killed you all."
Pablo Kreimer recalled a corporal who had spent the entire day during basic training singing a horrific, taunting rhyme.
Here comes Hitler down the wall, killing Jews to make soap.
Imagine trying to learn how to defend your country while your instructor is singing that to you.
It is psychological torture. But the soldiers fought back with incredible wit and courage whenever they could find an opening.
That same corporal proudly commented to Marcelo Laufer one day, "Did you know Hitler was also a corporal?"
And Laufer, without missing a beat, fired back. No coincidence, he wasn't good for anything better, just like you.
It is a brilliant, flashing moment of defiance in the face of sheer, banal evil.
It really is. But tragically, a witty comeback couldn't shield them from the devastating aftermath of the conflict.
The war officially ended on June 14, 1982, with the formal surrender signed by General Mario Benjamin Menendez.
For these young soldiers, the end of the shooting brought a complex, overwhelming emotional cocktail.
There was immense relief that 3 months of freezing nightmare had finally concluded.
Paired with profound grief and anger over the friends they had watched die.
And the deepest tragedy is that the nightmare was not actually over when they boarded the ships to go home.
It morphed into a devastating double betrayal upon their return to the mainland.
First, they returned to a broader Argentine society that largely treated the defeated veterans as crazy.
The government and society failed completely to reintegrate them into daily life.
Abandoning them without psychological support, help finding work, or assistance resuming their studies.
But the second, perhaps much deeper betrayal for the Jewish soldiers came from their very own community.
When we talk about the major Argentine Jewish institutions, organizations like the DAIA, which is the Delegation of Argentine Jewish Associations, and the AMIA, the Argentine Israelite Mutual Association.
These are the bodies designed to protect and advocate for Jewish citizens.
Yet, they utterly ignored the psychological and emotional devastation of these returning young men.
They took absolutely no notice of their delicate situation or how desperately they were struggling to survive civilian life.
The human cost of that institutional silence is quantifiable, and it is absolutely heartbreaking.
Statistics show that between the end of the war in 1982 and 2012, the suicide rate of ex-combatants actually exceeded the total number of Argentine soldiers killed in combat during the conflict itself.
Let that sit for a second. The deadliest part of this war for these veterans wasn't the British artillery or the freezing trenches.
No, It was the crushing isolation, the psychological aftermath,
Horrible.
and the profound betrayal by their own country.
And their own community leaders when they returned home.
Recognizing this profound, ongoing injustice, journalist Hernan Dobry attempted to intervene
He went to the then president of the DIIA, Aldo Donzis.
and proposed that an official ceremony be organized to finally honor the Jewish combatants and officially recognize their bravery.
He did the work for them. He even provided a nominal list with the detailed data of each soldier.
But absolutely nothing happened. The institutions remained silent.
They just brushed it under the rug again. It ultimately took the veterans themselves forcing the issue, refusing to be erased.
On November 17, 2011, veterans Sospin, Van Roy, and Katz marched directly to Donzis.
They confronted him face to face to demand the recognition they were rightfully owed.
More importantly, they requested the formal right to visit Jewish schools to finally tell their stories, from the front lines to the next generation.
Finally, after years of relentless pushing, on April 20, 2012, they received their rightful official recognition for their bravery and heroism.
It is a history that absolutely demands our attention. And for those who wish to understand the full scope of this subject, there are several essential readings I highly recommend.
Please share them.
You should definitely explore A. Alonso Piñero's Historia de la Guerra de Malvinas, published in 1992, for the broader context.
Okay.
Graciela Bendor's 2003 work, Católicos, Nazis y Judíos, provides vital cultural background.
And Dobry's book, right?
Yes, Hernan Dobry's 2012 book, Los Rabinos de Malvinas, is completely indispensable for the primary testimonies. Gabriela Loderstein's 2008 book, Los Judíos bajo el terror, 1976 to 1983, offers a much broader view of the era's violence. And finally, Daniel Levovich's 2003 study, Nacionalismo y Antisemitismo en la Argentina, perfectly frames the historical roots of the institutional bigotry we have discussed today.
We started today by talking about the dual nightmare of war, of facing a lethal enemy in front of you and a vicious tormentor behind you.
A reality no 19-year-old should ever face.
And it leaves you with a lingering, haunting question to consider long after this discussion ends. What happens to a nation's soul when it forcefully asks its youth to shed their blood for a flag while simultaneously treating those very same children as enemies of the state? Thank you very much for having been with us. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for free, and we invite you to tune in to the next episode.